turn it over to you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this UN General Assembly parallel event on strengthening freedom of thought, conscience, religious, and belief in Yemen for sustainable peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. And welcome to everyone joining online, as well as those of you in person. And you probably noticed that the title is drawn specifically from the UN General Assembly theme for this year, which is Rebuilding Trust and Reigniting Global Solidarity, accelerating actions on the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. And how does that look like in Yemen is the question. So Yemen has a population of over 24 million people, with more than 80% of the Yemen has a population of over 24 million people, with more than 80% of the population struggling to access food, safe drinking water, and adequate health services. In this humanitarian crisis, why are we talking about strengthening freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief? Violence in Yemen in 2023 has seen an uptick, including an increase in targeted attacks and violent speech towards religious minorities. On May 25th, 2023, Houthi militias stormed a peaceful meeting of Baha'is in Sana'a and arrested 17, including 5 women, and continued to detain 11 of them incommunicado. On June 2nd, 2023, the UN Commissioner on Human Rights reported how the Mufti Shamseddin Sharafeddin, appointed by leaders of the Houthi militant movement, accused the detained Baha'is of being apostates and saying that they should, quote, be killed if they did not repent. Similar violence has been recorded in Yemen towards Christian converts and others since the start of this conflict, and raised during the virtual 53rd Human Rights Council parallel event co-sponsored by the Slovak Republic Bureau of the Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. In addition, Article 259 of the Penal Code in Yemen provides that apostasy is punishable by death. There are an estimated 40,000 Christians, both native and refugees abroad. The number in Yemen, however, has dwindled, and USCIRF reports that the community has shrunk to being only a few thousand. Christians who remain in Yemen are unable to worship in public without fear. The organizations behind this event are the Jubilee Campaign, Baha'is International, Set My People Free, the Minority Council Yemen, Christian Freedom International, and CAP Freedom of Conscience. We are also thankful to USCIRF for prioritizing the question in Yemen, and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, recently released their report on the religious freedom situation in the Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. We are honored to have USCIRF Vice Chair Fred Davey with us in person, and UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Dr. Nazila Ganea, joining online. We're also honored to have Abdul Rafi with us in person. Online, we will have survivor speakers representing the diverse beliefs in Yemen, including Christian, Jewish, Baha'i, and secular. Pastor Mashur Al-Kahib-Ladi, Huda Abaid, Shama, and a Baha'i survivor, Nader Al-Zakah. They care deeply for their country, still determined to find a brighter future. And Anne Bilal, the Executive Director of the Jubilee Campaign, will also be joining us in a little bit for concluding remarks. And thank you to Sahud Parasat for providing interpretation via Zoom. So without further ado, we will soon be handing the floor over to the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Dr. Nazila Ganea. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief is an independent expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council, whose role is to identify existing and emerging obstacles to the enjoyment of the right to freedom of religion or belief, and present recommendations on ways and means to overcome such obstacles. Dr. Ganea herself is a professor of international human rights law and director of the MSc in International Human Rights Law at the University of Oxford. Her academic work is often connected with multilateral practice in international human rights law. She's contributed actively to networks interested in freedom of religion or belief and its interrelationship with other human rights, and advised on states and other stakeholders. And I know when I was at USCIRF, she had authored reports on the intersection of women and rights and religious freedom that's still very, very relevant. She recently released the UN statement in conjunction with the August 22nd, 2023, and with support of 6 additional mandates. So we are honored to have you here. The floor is yours.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear Nadine, so lovely to see you all, and sorry I can't be with you in person. 2 days ago, I flew back from Tanzania, and that's the closest I got to Yemen. As I flew over Yemen, I thought about all the survivors and those suffering in that country, and I thought about the poignancy of this event that I'm honored that you invited me to. Thank you to the organizers and the partners of this event. I want to express my full support for the gravity of this parallel event and the importance of the United Nations addressing it at the highest level. I know it's been raised at the United Nations Security Council. I hope it's not only addressed in this parallel event to the UN General Assembly, but by the General Assembly as well. We all know that the situation of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief in Yemen is of deep concern and has been for many years, despite the already grave consequences of the protracted internal conflict and the lack of law and order and even food insecurity in Yemen. Even despite all of that, religious minorities in Yemen have to additionally suffer targeted human rights violations and yet another level of insecurity and threat. Many UN special rapporteurs have repeatedly conveyed concern to the government and the de facto authorities. We address both at the same time. We have repeatedly conveyed our concern through letters, through press statements, describing the pattern, the reports of violations that constitute grave instances of religious persecution against minorities. International, national, and local attention and advocacy, we hope, may have contributed in promoting some small positive developments on occasion. But of course, the lion's share is borne by the ongoing sufferers of this violation and their resilience in Yemen itself. This has been just a drop in the ocean for the actual situation that continues to be suffered by religion and belief minorities in Yemen. The vulnerability is of religious and belief minorities, but also all groups that are being discriminated, harassed, or worse in the name of religion or belief. All of this, in addition to the consequences of the conflict, the lack of good governance and rule of law, and the humanitarian crisis. Last year, this mandate raised its concerns, along with a number of other special rapporteurs, about systematic violations against women and girls in Yemen, which were being perpetrated by Ansarullah or the Houthis, that related to the restriction of women traveling without a male guardian or mahram, the prevention of their access to reproductive health care, and their prevention from working, gender segregation, and other violations. So this is an instance of violations in the name of religion or belief impacting the human rights of other groups, in addition to religion or belief minorities. As you just mentioned, the special procedures were also active back in June. Just 2 months ago, we sent an urgent appeal and a press statement on the enforced disappearance of 17 members of the Baha'i community of Yemen, who were abducted whilst peacefully carrying out the annual elections of the national governing body. We highlighted how violations of against religious or belief minorities have been exacerbated by hate speech that has, on occasion, amounted to the incitement of hatred, hostility, and discrimination. A number of these were sadly carried out in the Friday sermons themselves. This hate speech is intended to drive a wedge in society, which is particularly alarming at a time when peace negotiations are underway. These expressions threaten the life and integrity of entire communities across Yemen. In his last report to the Human Rights Council in 2022, Professor Ahmad Shahid, my predecessor, highlighted that the Ansarullah or Houthi movement had coerced Jewish and Baha'i communities into leaving the country. blackmailing them by arbitrarily detaining religious leaders, influencers, and community members, negatively impacting and diminishing their populations. And you just heard about how that has also been a shared experience with the Christian community of Yemen. The statistics speak for themselves. In 2016, there were a reported 1,500 or 2,000 Jews in Yemen. At the time of the March 2022 session, my predecessor reported 1 Jew remaining in the country of Yemen. Already in 2016, in 2018, and repeatedly in subsequent years, it was noted by this mandate that dozens of members of religious minorities had been arbitrarily detained, ill-treated, tortured, and prosecuted on grounds of their religion or belief by means of judicial procedures that evidently fail to meet the guarantees for a fair trial. They don't deserve the term judicial procedures. They make a mockery of the legal process. A number of press statements issued by mandate holders in the last 5 years draw attention to the discriminatory practices that must be outlawed in Yemen. We cannot accept the injustice of having anyone punished, including by death, on grounds of their religion or belief. The right to freedom of religion or belief is non-derogable and must be respected at all times, even in times of public emergency. I hope that the international community can double its efforts to protect all of groups who have been discriminated and persecuted in the name of religion or belief or on the basis of their religion or belief. I invite states to also increase their support for civil society organizations who are advocating for the rights of religious minorities, because this is essential in building capacity, in supporting and documenting violations. I hope and I pray that one day I will also be able to visit Yemen. In the meantime, if there is anything that this mandate can do, it will certainly be responsive and uphold the rights of all groups in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you for your strong voice for the people of Yemen and all the work you're doing to support freedom of religion or belief globally. We're so thankful to have you there. And now I'd like to hand the floor over to my dear friend and former colleague at USERF, Vice Chair Fred Davey.
Great, thank you, Madam Moderator. And let me just acknowledge you and your leadership and how much we appreciate your presence, not only here, but in the sort of international arena at large when it comes to freedom of religion and belief. So thank you for your leadership. And thank you all for allowing me to be here this morning for this invitation to speak. I'm going to talk about some of the things that you've already heard to make the case for why USERF makes the recommendations we make to the State Department as it relates to Yemen. As our moderator said, I am Frederick Davey. I'm the Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF. USERF is an independent, bipartisan government advisory body created by 1998 International Religious Freedom Act of Congress, of the US Congress. The Commission uses international standards to monitor the freedom of religion or belief abroad and makes policy recommendations to the Congress, to the White House, and to the State Department to advance freedom of religion or belief through US foreign policy. After nearly 8 brutal years of war, religious freedom conditions in Yemen, as we've heard both from our moderator and from our special rapporteur, have continued to deteriorate, especially in northern areas controlled by Ansar Allah, the Houthi rebel movement. The Houthis continue to perpetrate severe violations of freedom of religion or belief, with significant impacts on individuals of various faiths or beliefs, and those with none at all, as we will hear later. Authorities are deploying a panoply of tools and tactics, including propaganda, indoctrination camps, and educational curricula to harass, defame, and incite violence against vulnerable faith communities. Religious minority life in Houthi-controlled areas faces near total extinction. Houthi targeting of Jews, as we heard, Baha'is, of course, Christians, as we heard, non-believers, has compelled many to flee to the south or leave Yemen entirely, seeking safety and refuge abroad. The few remaining members of each community stay hidden due to fears of harassment, intimidation, and violence. Because of these threats, most Yemeni Baha'is have fled Houthi territory to seek safety and refuge from Houthi persecution, including propaganda branding them as infidels, enemies of Islam, and fugitives. In May, as has already been stated, we witnessed Houthis' cruel and senseless invective unfold in real time when a live Zoom captured the moment foreign government raided a peaceful annual community gathering in Sana'a, detaining 17 Yemeni Baha'is, including 5 women. Over the last 5 months, USCIRF, along with US government partners, including Special Envoy for Yemen, Timothy Lenderking, Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Rashad Hussein, and UN Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, has repeatedly and unequivocally called for their unconditional release. And while we are encouraged by the release of several detainees, including Mr. Ahmad al-Malahi, who suffers a life-threatening liver conditioning requiring medical care, 11 Yemeni Baha'is, of course, as we've heard, continue to languish in Houthi prison, where they are subject to forced education and taunts of being subjected to baseless criminal prosecution. USCIRF will continue to call for their unconditional release, while also urging Houthi authorities to drop all charges against 24 community members who remain under indictment. We call further on Houthis to cease the confiscation of Baha'i land, property, and assets. Houthi intolerance for difference and religious diversity extends beyond the Baha'i community. Again, as we've heard, Yemen's Jewish community, one of the world's oldest, once consisted of 55,000 Jews. Today, Jewish prisoner of conscience, Labi Marhavi, is reportedly the last remaining Jew in the country. Despite a 2019 Houthi court order for his release, he has remained in jail since his arrest in 2016. Furthermore, the remaining Christians in Houthi-controlled Yemen cannot worship safely in public and fear public exposure for their religious identity. Yemeni law prohibits conversion from Islam to any other religion, including Christianity. In this context, Yemeni Christian converts face severe persecution, including ongoing harassment, fears of arbitrary detention and torture, In prison, some Christians have been forced to recant their faith under extreme duress. Mushir Abdul Salam is a survivor of 8 egregious abuses and has summoned the courage to share his story with us today, so we will hear from him later. Christian convert women have been subject to physical beatings and brutalization. Houthi security guards have also threatened female detainees with violence against their children and their families. Their experience reflects the Houthis' movement's broader persecution of all Yemeni women and girls, again, as we've heard, on religious grounds. This ongoing issue has increased severely over the past year, with Houthis' maram, or male escort requirement. This policy, justified on religious grounds, mandates, as our special rapporteur has mentioned, all women in Houthi-controlled areas, including non-Yemenis, to always be accompanied by a man while traveling. Authorities have increasingly imposed other gender-based policies with religious underpinning. These include restricting women's access to healthcare, segregating men and women in public spaces, and forcibly closing businesses that cater exclusively to women. Just weeks ago, the Houthis began enforcing a new gender segregation policy at Sana'a University. Part of the movement's ironically named Morals campaign. At Sana'a University, this new segregation policy restricts and limits women's access to the campus. The Houthis' continued social, legal, and political pressure has eroded the freedoms of women and religious communities in Houthi-controlled areas. It also undermines the credibility of Houthis' commitment to a sustainable political agreement, and is doing irreparable damage to a country with millennial-long history of religious diversity. Each year since 2018, and most recently in November of 2022, the U.S. State Department has designated Houthis as an entity of particular concern, an EPC. The legal definition under the Frank R. Wolf International Religious Freedom Act is for non-state actors that control territory and engage in systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. USCIRF has recommended the Houthis be designated as an EPC every year since 2019. As Special Envoy, Inderking works alongside U.S. and global partners to facilitate a resolution to the protracted conflict in Yemen. USCIRF urges that religious freedom concerns in Houthi areas be addressed as part of a long-term peace agreement. I want to thank you again. I want to thank the Baha'i international community for hosting this event and the coalition of organizers for choosing to highlight the increasingly dire situation of religious minorities and women in Yemen as a side event at this UN General Assembly. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davey. That was powerful remarks. Both of those remarks have really set the stage well for us to have a better understanding of the conditions right now. So we'll have some questions for you later. So now we're honored to have Pastor Mashir joining us online. Pastor Mashir is a Christian convert and a pastor who was a religious prisoner of conscience for 4 years in Yemen at the hands of Houthi authorities. He was released in February 2021. Dear Pastor Mashir, the floor is yours.
أسعد الله كل أوقاتكم وشكرا لكم جميعا. شكرا لمن نظم وأتاح لنا هذه الفرصة. أنا ممثل عن الأقلية المسيحية اليمنية، وكمسيحي يمني تعرضت للاعتقال والتعذيب مع عدد من زملائي المسيحيين، وأجبرنا على الرحيل من اليمن تحت تحريض مقيت على معاداتنا بتهم الردة والعمالة للخارج، وهي تهم عقوبتها الإعدام. فالقانون اليمني لا يعترف بحرية الإنسان في اختيار دينه، فالاعتراف بإيمانك أو الدفاع عن ديانتك يعد جريمة ازدراء وتجديف للدين الإسلامي وعقوبتها السجن. مشكلتنا كأقليات في اليمن هي أن الدولة لا تعترف بوجودنا كطائفة وأقلية دينية، وتعتبر أن أي دين آخر غير الإسلام دخيل على المجتمع ومؤامرة تستهدف الدولة والدين والسيادة، ويجب التصدي لها بقوة حتى لو تطلب الأمر سفك الدماء. ومنذ سيطرة الحوثيين على السلطة في اليمن تواجه الأقلية الدينية تحريض إعلامي ممنهج تحت إشراف قيادتهم، إلى التي خطاباتهم لا تخلو من الإشارة للأقليات بوصفها أدوات الحرب الناعمة على الدين والمجتمع. وتعرض المسيحيين في اليمن للكثير من الضغوط في جميع مجالات الحياة، بما في ذلك الحرمان من التعليم والتوظيف والحياة الأسرية والقدرة على ممارسة الطقوس الدينية في أعلى مستوياته منذ اندلاع الحرب في 2015. كما واجه المسيحيون تمييزا مجتمعيا في توزيع المساعدة الإنسانية الطارئة والرعاية الصحية في اليمن، وإهمال الأسر الموجودة في القاهرة وحرمانهم من المساعدات ومن الدعم الحكومي والمنح الجامعية التي تقدمها السفارة بسبب النظرة الشائعة لكل مختلف، خاصة نحو النساء ومعاملتهن بشكل سيء. فطالما القوانين تحظر حرية الدين فالدولة لن تقدم أي حماية أو دعم للأقليات. في 21 مارس 2021 قمنا بإنشاء المجلس الوطني للأقليات بمشاركة الأقلية الدينية البهائية واليهودية وأقلية السود في اليمن، كرافعة للمطالبة بحقوقنا في مختلف الاتجاهات الداخلية والدولية، حيث وأن أهم ما نهدف إليه هو إيجاد حزمة من التعديلات الدستورية والقانونية التي تكفل حرية الدين والمعتقد والمواطنة المتساوية والعيش المشترك، والوصول إلى دولة مدنية تكفل الحقوق والحريات وحمايتها، حيث وهذه من أهم الأسس لتحقيق السلام المستدام. ولكننا جوبهنا بعدد من العراقيل، أهمها عدم الاستجابة لنا ومنحنا التراخيص الرسمية من قبل الحكومة المعترف بها دوليا، والذي من خلاله سنتمكن من التحرك بشكل رسمي وقانوني لتحقيق أهدافنا. لذلك نرجو من المجتمع الدولي أن يقوم بدوره لحماية الأقليات والمساعدة على حل مشكلاتهم ودعمهم داخل اليمن أو المهجرين خارجها، وإلزام الحكومة الشرعية بواجبها لحماية حرية كل يمني في اختيار دينه ومعتقده بنفسه، وأن يتم إشراك الأقلية الدينية والعرقية في مختلف اللجان التي ستعمل على بناء عملية السلام في اليمن في المرحلة القادمة، وتكون قضية حرية اختيار الدين من ضمن أولويات أي اتفاقيات بين الأطراف المتنازعة. ومطالبنا ليست صعبة على المجتمع الدولي إذا أخذت بعناية وجدية، لكنها بالنسبة لنا كمسيحيين وبهائيين ويهود ومهمشين مع أبنائنا وأسرنا نعتبره حلم كبير، وتعتبر كفالة هذه الحقوق سبب رئيسي لتحقيق السلام المستدام حتى فيما بين المذاهب الأخرى والمجتمع اليمني بشكل عام. أذكر هنا أنه لا زال هناك اثنين من أبناء الطائفة، من أبناء الأعضاء المجلس الوطني للأقليات، أحدهم من الطائفة اليهودية ليبي سالم مرحبي لا زال في السجن في صنعاء منذ أكثر من 6 سنوات، وأيضا أحد أبناء الطائفة المسيحية أكثر من سنة يرزح في صنعاء تحت سلطة صنعاء. شكرا لكم وربنا يوفقكم. شكرا.
Thank you so much for sharing those pertinent remarks. I would now like to hand the floor to Huda Obaid, a survivor of persecution. Huda survived arbitrary detention and torture at the hands of Houthi rebels for her Christian faith. Authorities arrested her in April 2018 and only released her in June 2019. They also threatened to marry off her daughter while they detained her. The floor is yours.
مرحبا بكم جميعا. بينما أصبح الدور المحوري الذي تحتله الفتيات والنساء في تطوير مجتمعاتهن وشعوبهن واضحا للعيان في معظم بلدان العالم، حيث هن المربيات الأوائل للأجيال وهن شريكات في مختلف مجالات الحياة الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية، ومشاركتهن تزيد من إنتاجية الشعوب وتساهم في التقدم والازدهار وتعزز السلم والوئام، حيث تمتعت بكامل حقوقها. وهنا ما تزال حقوق الأقليات الدينية مقيدة في اليمن وعرضة للانتقاص والازدراء الاجتماعي والتشويه والانتهاك، بالإضافة إلى أنها ظلت خاضعة لقيود قانونية وإجراءات مشددة ذات مضمون تمييزي تفرضها السلطة على أفراد هذه الأقليات. وازدادت معاناة الأقليات اليمنية في ظل سيطرة الحوثي على سلطة الأمر الواقع، لدرجة أضحى واقع الأقليات في اليمن مأساة مروعة، الأمر الذي ضاعف معاناة نساء الأقليات. وفي ظل حملات التحريض على كراهية الأقليات الدينية التي تشنها الحوثي عبر مختلف وسائل الإعلام ومنابر المساجد والدورات الثقافية ووسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، فقد طالت تلك الحملات نساء وفتيات الأقليات اليمنيات، بما في ذلك إطلاق الشائعات الكاذبة والافتراءات الملفقة، منها ما يمس في أخلاقهن وانتمائهن للمجتمع. يزداد وضع المرأة اليمنية سوءا على سوء، حتى أضحت تعيش في جحيم التمييز والاضطهاد والحرمان والتضييق من أبسط الحقوق. وهذا جعلنا كنساء الأقلية المسيحية والأقليات الأخرى بشكل خاص نعاني بشكل مضاعف ومجحف من النبذ والسجن والتعذيب داخل اليمن، والتهجير واللجوء لخارج اليمن، والحرمان من التعليم والعمل والمشاركة في اتخاذ القرار والبناء، وإقصاءنا بشكل متعمد من أي مساعدات دولية ودعم حكومي وصحي ونفسي. لا سيما أنه توجد العديد من الأسر اللاجئة التي تتكون من أم وأطفال فقط، ولا يوجد لها عائل غير الأم، التي تعاني من صعوبات الحياة منفردة وتتعرض للمهانة والابتزاز والتهديد في ظل غياب الحكومة وعدم وجود الدعم والحماية لهن. نحن في المجلس الوطني للأقليات في اليمن نؤمن يقينا بأن وقف اضطهاد النساء وتحقيق المساواة الكاملة بين الجنسين هو من أهم مطالب السلم الذي ينبغي له أن يخيم في ربوع بلدنا الحبيبة. إن مشاركة المرأة جنبا إلى جنب مع الرجل في كافة الشؤون العامة، بما في ذلك المشاركة في مفاوضات السلام والتخطيط للمستقبل وتغيير القانون والعمل الحكومي القيادي بثقة وجدارة، بالإضافة إلى تمكينها من الوصول إلى مستويات التعليم العالية والفرص المتكافئة التي حرمنا منها غالبا. تستطيع النساء أن يقدمن مساهمات فريدة في خلق نظام عادل يتسم بالحيوية والتعاون والانسجام، ويمتاز بدرجة عالية من التعاطف والإنسانية لم يحظى به اليمن من قبل. نناشد وندعو المجتمع الدولي والمنظمات الإنسانية بالاهتمام والتعاون بجدية مع ما تواجهه نساء وأطفال الأقلية المسيحية والأقليات الأخرى داخل اليمن أو في مواطن اللجوء من كافة حقوقها الإنسانية، وبأن تكون مناصرتها ودعمها من أولويات العمل الإنساني والحقوقي، والضغط على الحكومة المعترف بها بتبني نساء الأقليات المسيحيات والأقليات الأخرى داخل اليمن واللاجئات خارج اليمن، وتقديم الدعم والحماية والتعليم والرعاية النفسية لهم. شكرا.
Great, can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Of course, I want to say thank you for your powerful remarks. Both your remarks and Pastor Mashur really helped us better understand the situation for Christians in Yemen, and of course, especially women and women-led households of all religious minority communities, and the special vulnerability that exists for them. Now we will be hearing from Shama, who will be representing the Jewish community. We're very pleased to have you. We'll hand the floor off to you now. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا لكم ولمنظمين هذه الفعالية. نحن يهود اليمن نعتبر جزءا أساسي من المكون الحضاري للمجتمع اليمني، ونعتبر من اليمنيين الأوائل المؤسسين للممالك السبائية والحميرية والقتبانية وغيرها، حتى جاء الإسلام وبدأ تاريخ الاضطهاد ضد اليهود اليمنيين، حيث كنا متواجدين في مناطق مختلفة ونمتهن الأعمال الحرفية. ومع مرور الوقت ومع استمرار موجات الاضطهاد والقتل والتهجير تقلصت أعدادنا إلى العشرات، متفرقين في المحافظات. في العام 2021 تم تهجير آخر 3 أسر من داخل اليمن بوعد إطلاق الأسير ليبي سالم موسى مرحبي الذي اعتقل قبل 10 سنوات وتعرض لأشد أنواع التعذيب، وتم أخذ زوجته فقط لأنه يهودي يمني. وبرغم أنه تاريخيا أثبت أننا لم ننشأ أي صراع اجتماعي مع الآخرين، إلا أنه لا يزال يتم اضطهادنا والتعامل معنا بالتمييز والكراهية والتحريض علينا في الخطب والمنابر وخطابات الحوثي. وبالنظر لوضعنا نحن اليهود في الغربة، وبالرغم أن أعدادنا لا تتجاوز 30 شخص، إلا أننا نعاني من سوء الأوضاع المعيشية والصحية والاجتماعية والنفسية، وحتى أن أبنائنا محرومين من التعليم، ونحن نعاني من الإقصاء من المساعدات وعدم التفات المنظمات المحلية والدولية لنا. لذلك نحن نطالب المجتمع الدولي بإيجاد حلول سريعة لوضعنا نحن يهود اليمن، وأيضا نطالب المجتمع الدولي بالضغط على الحوثيين بسرعة إطلاق الأسير اليهودي ليبي سالم موسى مرحبي. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
Thank you so much, Shama, and the Jewish community for taking the time to prepare that important statement. Now we are thankful to have Abdul Yafi joining us in person, and we will hand the floor to you.
Thank you. Over a decade ago, on this date and not too far from here, the world learned how destructive unchecked zealotry can be. And today we talk about that same brand of zealotry and what it looks like at its roots. Yemen is currently a miserable and broken country, filled with unimaginable beauty and history. My name is Abdul Karim Al-Yafi'i, or Abdul for my English-speaking friends. I'm not here to share my own story. I came here to speak for my friends who cannot speak for themselves. I lived for years in the heat of Aden, a city on the southern coast, and I stayed in my family's apartment, which had an internet cafe on the first floor, a small air-conditioned oasis for curious teenagers. That was where I met Amjad Abdurrahman, a noisy, loud, lanky boy who could talk your ear off. One day, he saw my computer screen and noticed I was writing in English. So he pulled up the chair next to me, and without even introducing himself, he started asking questions about what it's like living here in the West. He was, after all, a teenage boy living in a country where women wear hijabs and niqabs. So in the beginning, his questions were all about girls. What they dressed like, what they looked like. I told him what I knew, and what I didn't know, I made up, being a teenager myself. Our relationship continued like this. I would answer Amjad's questions, and he would tell me where to find good bootlegged DVDs. And soon enough, he started asking different questions about life, about work, and about our laws. One seemingly ordinary question he asked, I still feel guilty for even answering. He asked, "What laws do you follow in America?" I don't get it. He said, "Okay, do you follow Jewish laws or Christian laws?" I said, "Neither." "Do you follow Muslim laws then?" "No." He was confused because to him, these were the only options. "So then what laws do you follow?" I said, "We make our own." In a hurry, I gave him an oversimplified idea of secularism. Religion is a private matter, and that the laws are made by people to protect everybody, regardless of their beliefs. A few days later, I was on a flight back to America, and I didn't think about him again for maybe over a decade. But that's when I found out that he became a law student, that he founded and led a secular club, and that he moderated debates about the conditions of women in Yemen, and that he was killed, shot 3 times by jihadists in the same internet cafe that we met in, the same exact one. They killed him, and then furthermore, they blocked people from attending his funeral, and they forced his family to bury him far, far away from the city because he was marked as an apostate. And Amjad wasn't the only one. I had also gone to school with a kid named Omar Batawi. I almost didn't recognize his memorial pictures because he had grown twice as tall. But I knew his smile. He was always smiling, a big, full-toothed smile. And I was sure he was going to get old smiling and that he would die smiling. But instead, Omar was kidnapped as a teenager in front of his home and found dead with bullet holes in another part of town. Why? Maybe because he saw religion differently. Omar wrote on his Facebook regarding zealotry shortly before he died. He said, "Innani ara Allah fi zuhur wa antum tarawna fil qubur." I see God in the flowers and you see him in the graveyards. And for that, they sent him to an early one. Yemen is stuck. If we stay with the same thinking, we'll be stuck in that same pain. We need diversity of thought now more than ever. And we need to protect our free thinkers if we ever hope to heal. I shared the stories of my friends. I hope I did them a fraction of the justice that they had, that their families never had. So thank you for listening. And that's all from me.
Wow. Thank you for your powerful remarks. It's so easy for us to talk about religious freedom violations, like there are these white-collar crimes and laws that should be changed, but the human cost, as you just shared, is almost unspeakable. And thank you for adding that component to this discussion.
Thank you.
Because that's really what this is all about, is the impact this is having on the people of Yemen, and how perhaps people sitting at other tables pushing for better policies could make a difference in those very lives that we're talking about. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Nader Al-Sakaf, who is a member of the Office of Public Affairs of the Baha'is of Yemen. He's a survivor. The rebels arbitrarily arrested and imprisoned him twice, in 2015 and 16. Authorities are currently trying him absentia for believing in the Baha'i faith. Wow, and I understand that the bios for all of our speakers will be in the chat, so you can learn more about them. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Actually, I was planning to start with a few points, but maybe I could change it. before I start talking. Like the point that Dr. Ghania mentioned maybe earlier, that she wished to visit Yemen. So I hope that I could, me, myself, Huda, Shama, Mushir, Abdul Yafi, could once in the near future welcome you, dear Dr. Ghania and Commissioner Davy, and all the participants in Yemen when the situations develop to become the real Yemen. I'm sure that my Yemeni friends will acknowledge that the real and the simple Yemenis, they have innate the concept of coexistence. The ideologies that the Houthis imported is not Yemeni ideologies, and also the fanatic and radical groups that exist in some other places in Yemen. This is not the real concept of Yemenis. Yemenis, they have diversities in, as many had mentioned, there is Christian, there is Jews, there is Baha'is, there is many other sects that we lived in harmony for thousand and thousand years, and this is something new that's happening in Yemen. So to go back about what we are talking, the Baha'i community since 2014, when the Houthis got in control of Sana'a, had started to face a kind of a systematic persecution that each year it was, it was going to escalate. And since then, the Baha'i community issued, had a different kind of persecutions, like issuance of a death sentence, confiscating their property, closing their administrative and development institutions, arbitrary arrest, torture, mention it. And personally, as you mentioned, in 2015, 2016, I was arrested. In 2016, there was more than 60 Baha'is and friends. They were arrested through, there was an organizing a youth conference urging for peace, coexistence, and acceptance. And the Houthi military forces, they raided and captured all those that they participated. Also, they looted two Baha'i-inspired NGOs in Yemen, and like a few things that I could share that maybe sometimes we cannot believe it, but like one of the accusation that the Special Criminal Court in 2016 had mentioned against the Baha'is, and I will quote exactly from what the prosecutor had mentioned, that the emergence of Baha'is with good morals would tempt Muslims to leave Islam and embrace the Baha'i faith. Could we imagine that this is written in official document? In 2017, also the situation had got worse, and a few other Baha'is, they were captured, some from streets, some from their jobs. And in 22nd May 2017, as Dr. Ghania mentioned, the previous UN Special Reporter of Freedom of Religion of Belief, Mr. Ahmed Shahid, quoted exactly, the recent escalation in the persistent pattern of persecution of the Baha'i community in Sana'a mirrors the persecution suffered by the Baha'is living in Iran. And we could see now how these ideologies that the Houthis are trying to disseminate in Yemen, it is imported from outside Yemen. These persecutions had continued 2018. The death penalty of Mr. Hamad bin Haidar al-Baha'i was issued by the Special Criminal Court. Again, in end of 2018, there was a new case of 24 Baha'is had started in the Special Criminal Court. Me and my family are among this list of 24. And like for a while, we thought that there is a window of hope in 2020, in March, when there was a public televised from the Houthis leader Mehdi al-Mashal to pardon the Baha'is and release of them. But unfortunately, after a few months and in 30th July 2020, it was turned, and the 6 Baha'i, they were exiled from Yemen. And sorry. And for a while, we thought that maybe some things will change in the situation, but unfortunately, it started. The hate speech had continued. Sorry, the hate speech had continued in April 2022, in February 2023, and in April 2023 also. The head of the Houthis, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, in his speeches, he mentioned the Baha'is, mentioned different minorities, and disseminating and doing propaganda of a hate speech to try to cause kind of hatred among the Yemeni society toward the Baha'is. And also was mentioned earlier by the dear speakers on the latest one on the 2nd June 2023 by the Mufti, which was appointed by the Houthis. And although this was happening since a while, but again, unfortunately, on the 25th of May, a new wave of persecution had happened by the Houthis, and they arrested 17 Baha'i during a peaceful gathering. Among them are 5 women. And there is evidence now that shows that the Houthis are trying to put pressure on all detained Baha'is to recant their fate, to be released from the prison and the arbitrary detention. So as a simple, if I could keep it, if simplicity is there, like for a sustainable peace in Yemen, reaching this peace process that includes all citizens is imperative, I think so. And excluding minorities who are the integral part of the Yemeni society will only delay the achievement of a sustainable peace. And as a reminder, maybe finally for myself and for all of us, I could quote from the Universal House of Justice: "There are the darkest hours before the break of day. Peace, as promised, will come at night's end. Press on to meet the dawn." Thank you very much.
While so much of what you shared is discouraging, I appreciate you ending with this hope that there will be light at the end and that we're currently at the darkest point now. And I appreciate the opportunity to look ahead to see how do we move forward. And thank you for that really interesting presentation. Now we're going to be going to some questions and answers from the audience, and we're going to start actually with you, Vice Chair Davey. Could you expand on the legal landscape with regards to apostasy and anti-conversion laws in Yemen? How do these laws affect the right of Yemenis to determine their religion or beliefs? And how do they affect the situation of Christian converts specifically?
Thank you. So apostasy remains a capital offense in Yemen. And while Yemeni law prohibits conversion from Islam to any other religion, the law has significant impacts on Christian converts. Christian converts, especially Houthi-controlled areas in the north, are unable to fully manifest their freedom of religion or belief. Christians, converts worship in fear in the face of social stigma and threats of harassment, violence, and detention by Houthi authorities. Those in prison are beaten and brutalized and sometimes forced to recant their faith under extreme duress. USERF's position is clear, and that is the Commission urges all countries, including Yemen, to repeal their apostasy and anti-conversion laws and to free those who've been detained or convicted for apostasy and related crimes. The fundamental right to religion, to freedom of religion or belief, as enshrined in international law, includes the right to convert from one faith to another or to no faith at all. Therefore, religious freedom includes the right to manifest a wide range of beliefs including renouncing or changing one's religion. By criminalizing apostasy or conversion, Yemen's laws expressly impede this right. Apostasy laws further violate the right to choose one's religion and be free from coercion in doing so. So particularly as apostates or so-called apostates are often pressured to renounce their decisions to avoid harsh criminal penalties. And this, as is the case for Christian converts in Houthi-controlled areas. So again, USERF is unequivocal in urging, calling for the repeal of all apostasy and blasphemy laws, anti-conversion laws, and to free those who are detained or convicted for apostasy and apostasy-related crimes. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you so much. That's for those that don't know how to speak into this situation, that is something that could be brought up, that could be reminded to build the support internationally to repeal these horrific laws. And so thank you for bringing that to our attention. Our next question is going to go to the UN Special Rapporteur, who we're so thankful has remained and is willing to answer questions as well. The theme for this year's UN General Assembly is accelerating action on the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Not all of us are all that familiar with that term, but we know that your office has been following this for quite some time. And there are at least 16, there are several of them that really do impact Yemen. So I would love, what ways could the Yemeni government and other states really accelerate the realization of some of these SDGs in Yemen?
Thank you very much. I think the SDGs are crucial, and they run until 2030. This is where political consensus is the driver to achieve common goals around the world. We know that we're running woefully behind on the SDGs, but I was also very much alarmed by the evidence from the ground that was shared in this session about how humanitarian aid is not reaching religious and belief minorities, and especially that the exclusion of women from the public sphere is aggravating it even further. And that's already on top of the lack of food security and resources in Yemen. So we have now at least three layers of problem. First, the general deprivation in Yemen to development and its benefits. Second, the exclusion of religious minorities. And third, in addition, that women are not allowed in the public sphere, so that female-headed households in general, I suppose, but especially those of religious minorities, will be excluded yet further. The theme of the SDGs, if I keep it very brief, is leave no one behind. We have not only left Yemen behind, but we've left its religion and belief minorities even further behind, and the women-headed households yet further. We need to, there have been a number of studies and also a report by my predecessor, Professor Ahmad Shahid, that looks at the SDGs and freedom of religion or belief. Development goals rely on fairness and rely on non-discrimination. In a society and then a government that is intentionally excluded, development cannot reach religion or belief minorities. It is purposefully being excluded. This makes a mockery of development because, like human rights, development is meant to be non-discriminatory and inclusive. What should we do? Well, we should remind states that leave no one behind carries a particular burden for religion or belief minorities in Yemen.
Thank you so much. I was actually taking notes myself because I so appreciate your guidance on how to better speak into this situation and how disappointing it is to see these vulnerable groups even further help from whatever aid is being given and the support. So thank you so much for that. We will propose a question really to the survivors, but anybody on the panel is welcome to speak into this, which is what steps can and should be taken by states, journalists, civil society, respectively, to address the violence and hate speech towards minorities. Anyone would like to begin? Would any of our panelists online like to speak into what steps can be taken by states, journalists, civil society, really anyone to address the violence and hate speech towards minorities? We do have a hand up there. Go right ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
She's from a representative from the minority council.
نعم نورا جروي رئيس تحالف نساء من أجل السلام في اليمن. فقط أريد أن أؤكد على ما تعانيها النساء الأقليات خصوصا المقيمات في القاهرة، الطائفة المسيحية والطائفة اليهودية. يعني أنا كنت من ضمن من حملوا رسالة لرئيس المجلس الرئاسي بشأن إضافة عدد من الناجيات خصوصا الأخت هدى عبيد، والتي واجهت ظروف صعبة، تعذيب أكثر من عام في سجون الحوثيين. فكان كان أحد الأسباب أنه يتم استبعاد اسم الفتيات الأقليات أنه هؤلاء أقليات وهؤلاء مسيحيات أو يهوديات. يعني حتى الحكومة اليمنية لا تولي أي اهتمام للأقليات، بالعكس يعني تم شن حملة في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي ضدنا بأننا نتبنى الفتيات المسيحيات. أتمنى أن المنظمات الدولية أن تحظى هذه الأقليات باهتمامكم، خصوصا أن عددهم قليل. الطائفة اليهودية موجودين في القاهرة وبناتهم منعوا حتى من التعليم، لأن الوضع في مصر أيضا صعب، بقائهم غير آمن أيضا هنالك. الطائفة المسيحية أيضا وعددهم قليل، يمكن لا يتجاوز عدد 20 شخص في القاهرة، ووضعهم الإنساني سيء للغاية. إما أن توجه توصية للحكومة اليمنية بالاهتمام لهم، أو أن تجدوا منظمة تساعدهم، لأنه وضع النساء صحيا ونفسيا سيء للغاية. شكرا لكم.
Thank you. Do we have any others that would like to answer that question? We do. Go right ahead. Oh, we have two. Oh, I guess one is done. Okay. Thank you.
So it is me or Huda? Me, okay. Yeah, actually, I think it's the 1 million question. If somebody have a direct answer to this, please share it with us. But in general, as we mentioned, and our dear other speakers, they mentioned, in the context of Yemen, we still don't have minorities participating in the peace process. So the voices of the minorities are not heard till today. And this is an alarming situation, which is affecting the hatred speech, because you could see it just a one way.
In the room.
Sorry? Do you hear me?
Are you able to start again? I'm so sorry. Are you able to start again? We did
Yeah,
not.
sure. Yeah, okay, sure. So my voice is clear now?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just simply to repeat one point of it, like I said, that unfortunately till now, the voice of the minorities are not heard in the peace process that is going on in Yemen. And this is a very alarming situation, because it reflects the hate speech that you had referred to. And the situation that we have only one-way channel that are trying to cause propaganda against minorities. And the example that was mentioned, that the Houthis in their the leader and the mufti, that they were trying to cause disunity between the fabric of the Yemeni community against the Baha'is and against different other minorities. Here we are facing a very challenging situation. And for that, in the case, for example, of the Baha'is, the 17 Baha'is that they were arrested on 25th of May, we saw how the effect of the statements of the UN special procedure, the states, the international NGOs, was very effective and caused the release of the 6 Baha'is from those 17, and cleared the situation among a lot of Yemenis. When they heard these statements, when they heard a lot of NGOs talking about the real situation of the Baha'is, they could understand this. And I think so the international community should take a very concrete steps over here, that any kind of hatred speech is unacceptable. For example, the Houthis, when they are trying to talk about a peace process, how they could talk about a peace process and a simple human right pillars are not achieved. How the Houthis, they are trying to shake hand for peace, and in the other hand, they are disrespecting all the principles of human rights, either through the propaganda of hatred speech, either through actions. So I think so a concrete stand from the international community that this is not acceptable, that will be the first step to protect minorities. Thank you.
Do we have any others for that question?
Good.
Please, thank you.
أعتقد أنه المجتمع الدولي فيما مضى كان يشجع دائما الصحافة ويشجع الإعلام في أنه يكون لها حرية ويكون لها حقوق. مر الوقت واستخدموا الأشياء هذه في يعني أشخاص معينين لفائدتهم. فجاءت الحرب فاستمر الوضع هذا، استمر أنهم يتكلموا على الأشياء الذي يريدها قادة الدول في اليمن، أو قادة الصراع في اليمن، أو خارج اليمن، أو الناس الدول التي مشاركة في الحرب في اليمن. ما فيش نهائيا في إنه المجتمع الدولي أو الحرية للصحافة والإعلام أنه يكون في حرية للتعبير عن الدين وحرية المعتقد داخل الدول المتشددة دينيا. حتى الآن لاحظت يعني كثير أنه الصحفيين غير مهتمين بهذا الجانب، لأنه لا يوجد من يحفزهم، من يدعمهم من المنظمات الدولية أو منظمات الإعلام العالمية، حقوق الإنسان، في أنه مهم جدا مثلما تتكلم عن الحرب داخل اليمن، تتكلم أيضا عن الناس أصحاب المعتقدات الدينية الأخرى داخل اليمن، تتكلم عن المسيحيين، تتكلم عن اليهود، تتكلم أنه لدى الجميع حق في أنه يعتنق الدين. حتى لو الدولة اعترضت أو الحكومة اعترضت، حرية الدين الآن أو حرية الإعلام لا يقيدها مكان معين. السوشيال ميديا أصبح مفتوح بشكل كبير، الصحف أصبحت عبر الإعلام أكثر ما هي صحف ورقية مقيدة من الحكومة. فيحتاج الصحفيين لتوعية من ناحية الحرية الدينية ودعم الحرية الدينية، والتعريف أنه يوجد أقليات دينية أخرى داخل اليمن غير الأقليات الموجودة المتصارعة، لأنه الاعتراف بهذا الشيء يخفف من حدة الصراع ويفرض على حكومة الأمر الواقع أنه هذا شيء موجود. لكن عدم دعم الصحفيين، عدم توعية الصحفيين ودفعهم إلى التكلم في موضوع المعتقدات الدينية يجعل الموضوع قابل للنسيان فقط. شكرا.
Thanks so much. We have one more, right? Yes, Pastor, go right ahead.
وأنا أعتقد أنه تقدر الدول وخاصة الرباعية التي مهتمة بالملف اليمني والتي تدير أطراف الصراع في اليمن، بما في ذلك اللي هي بريطانيا، الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، الإمارات والسعودية، التي ممسكة بالأطراف والتي لها تأثير قوي جدا على الحكومة وعلى الأطراف الأخرى. تستطيع أن تعمل شيء من خلال الضغط لإيجاد حلول لمشكلة الأقليات أو لإيجاد بيئة أو مناخ قبول للجميع، خاصة فيما يخص الترخيص أو تسهيل عمل المجلس الوطني للأقليات. في هنا بسهولة ممكن الأمم المتحدة أو الدول الرباعية المنخرطة في عملية السلام بسهولة ممكنها أن تضغط على الحكومة الشرعية المعترف بها على الأقل في هذا الجانب، يعني حتى لو لم يكن من عند الحوثيين، ما لهمش ضغط على الحوثيين، لكن لهم يد طولة وضغط، بالأخص الرباعية لهم يد طولة وضغط على الحكومة الشرعية والجهات المنضوية تحتها، وممكن يعمل حاجات كثيرة. شكرا.
Thank you. Very interesting. Appreciate that. Anyone else? I think we got everyone on that question. I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. We do have a question from our online audience. So here it goes. This is from Bani Daggle. The problems we are discussing are mostly in Houthi-controlled territories. The UN agreements and treaties are not honored by the Houthis. Could it be conditional that no recognition will be given to them by the international community until there is a demonstration of commitment to upholding human rights of all people, especially minority and women? Do we have any takers on that one? Yes, the special rapporteur, thank you.
I'm not a good person to be answering this. This is really for states to comment, because recognition is a state matter rather than something that an independent expert can comment on. Nevertheless, I want to share that we had a bit of a dilemma, both with Afghanistan and with Yemen, as to how to address de facto authorities. We didn't have a process for it. So Yemen, sorry for your suffering, but you've made the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have to address this, that, you know, how can we address an authority that is not the legitimate government? And what the process that has developed in very recent years, both in relation to the Taliban and Ansarullah or the Houthis, is that we address them simultaneously with the legitimate government. So I think sometimes there has to be conversations with governments that have not been, with authorities that are not the legitimate government. But I take the point that sovereignty goes with responsibility and obligations, and these universal standards are on every authority to implement. My report next month to the UN General Assembly is recognizing the authorities at every level of society, including the subnational level, and how pertinent they can be in respecting freedom of religion or belief, or indeed violating it. So even today, even in the Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, the prison official can make a difference, the guard can make a difference, the soldiers can make a difference, the neighbors can make a difference. I am not taking away from the obligations of the state and the de facto authorities, but I want to say that we all have a role to play, even in the least promising situations, such as Sana'a today. People can make a difference to restoring the humanity of another person, even if they cannot fully restore their freedom of religion or belief. The subsequent report I have, which is for the UN Human Rights Council, and I've invited submissions for it, is to address hatred and intolerance. Intolerance has been in the language of freedom of religion or belief in the 1981 declaration, in the resolution that renews this mandate, but it's something that we haven't explored sufficiently. What do we do about the prejudices of society? We see, you know, this is just the surface of the persecution and targeting of religious or belief minorities. You know, this is the tip of the iceberg. What underscores and what facilitates violations of freedom of religion or belief is also a societal cancer that we need to address more robustly in all circumstances, and which is particularly challenging in times of conflict. So sorry to go beyond Yemen, but you also help us reflect more deeply on how crucial minorities are, how crucial respect of freedom of religion or belief and minority rights is, even in peace treaties. Let this become a model that we then mainstream and operationalize in all peace treaties in the future.
No, powerful remarks. Thank you for that. And it reminds me of, for my time being at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, they cover 28 of the worst violators of religious freedom in the world, and they recommend them to be either countries of particular concern or special watch list countries. But what happens is there's a few countries that are the same level of violations that get missed because their mandate is to focus on governments that violate religious freedom or belief at the highest levels, as is the State Department's process. That countries like Libya, like Yemen, are not in the conversation when we're talking about freedom of religion or belief and the worst violators in the world. And I feel like Yemen has been on every other list. Like if you look at the Holocaust list of the warning project for potential mass atrocities, Yemen's there. If you look at Open Doors, worst place to be a Christian, Yemen's there. So when you look at all these lists that talk about places that are among the worst in the world to be a religious minority, Yemen is there, but because it's an entity of particular concern, because it's a non-state actor that is really committing most of these atrocities, and there isn't a government that's being tasked with that, it has fallen through the cracks. And that's one of the reasons you're not seeing reporters bring it up the way that maybe a lot of the other countries that are just as bad or maybe not as bad are often spotlighted a lot more. So I do appreciate you sort of doing special reports to try to draw attention, understanding that it's missing as part of a government that's violating religious freedom. But yet it's so important that we have Yemen in the conversation. And one of the things I wanted to continue to discuss that you had mentioned, and I'm going to start with you, and you can certainly speak into the last question too if you'd like, is really how do we push for the rights of minorities in the peace process and for reconciliation? And so I'll hand it to you if that's all right.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to speak to the last point, and that is to just highlight something that our moderator has said that's very much a part of USERF's universe, and that is focusing in on the designation of non-state actors as entities of particular concern, and to really use that tool, which is a part of the 2010, I think it is, Frank Wolf legislation that expanded the jurisdiction of USERF. And in designating these non-state actors as entity of particular concern, it then allows for, encourages the State Department, US government to engage these entities in a more forceful and intentional way. And I would suggest including looking at perhaps targeted sanctions, et cetera, of the leaders of those entities to bring to bear the influence of these governments, particularly US governments, on these groups that are acting outside of the official government of a particular state, but are exercising an enormous amount of influence, control, and in the case of Yemen, inflicting horrendous conditions on religious minorities, women and others in that country. So the designation of entity of particular concern that is a part of a expanded jurisdiction, expanded law governing USERF is one place where I think the US at least could focus in terms of engaging around Yemen and engaging the Houthis there in that country. In terms of religious minorities in the peace process, USERF's position is that religious minorities should be seen as stakeholders in this process. They should be seen as partners in coming up with a resolution to the protracted conflict in Yemen, and that USERF calls on the United States government to advocate for religious freedom concerns in Houthi-controlled areas, and to have that addressed as a part of the long-term agreement that is eventually, hopefully, reached in this conflict. And USERF also calls on the U.S. government to work strongly and intentionally for the release of religious prisoners of conscience. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And I also understand we have an ambassador joining us today. No,
Counselor.
Counselor, thank you so much. I don't know if anyone else would like to comment on, open the floor to anyone that would like to comment on the last topic that we brought up with the last few, and to acknowledge those that came from the consulates and embassies to listen as well. We appreciate that.
I hear a lot that that there seems to be a big problem with particularly Houthi parts of the world, but within Yemen, even at large, there's a sentiment that, for instance, the words freedom and open-mindedness that we have here, we wear them as badges of honor. Over in Yemen, Hurriya and Maftuhin are usually seen as slurs. They're not particularly good things. And to change this kind of public sentiment takes a lot from, say, university students, from brave bloggers, from courageous journalists. These are the places that can kind of get those gears in motion to tell people that freedoms are good things. They're not breaking traditions, they're evolving. And the protections of those forums, I think, is particularly important, but how that would go about, I would not know. I defer to my politically inclined friends. So I'd like to pick your brains about what can we do there.
So, and I would defer also to the special rapporteur around what I'm about to raise, but clearly an international spotlight, first of all, on these issues seems to me to be crucial in ensuring that the violations don't take place with impunity, that they don't go unaddressed, unnoticed, or unacknowledged. I think that is crucial. So bringing this international spotlight on the issue is really important. And then again, in as much as these are particularly in Houthi controlled areas, you're talking about non-state actors, looking at not only what exists in our case in US law in terms of dealing with these entities that are non-state actors, but what exists in sort of international law, codes, covenants, et cetera, for engaging the same way. And I think the special rapporteur spoke to that to somewhat. In terms of culture change within countries, I think that's a big issue, but I do think perhaps these entities that are a part of the UN, other international organizations that have the ability to engage nations and populations within those nations could go a long way to promoting the ideas of freedom and open-mindedness as not something that stands that is necessarily attempting to destroy a civilization or a culture or tradition, but are ideas that seek to give people greater freedom and to allow the flourishing of the human spirit. So there are a few pieces to this. One, international community bringing attention to these issues, making sure they don't happen without being addressed. Two, what exists both in individual states' laws as well as international law to address these non-state actors. And three, what role can these international institutions and agencies play in the kind of culture change that you have suggested?
Thank you, Vice Chair Davey. I understand we have the special rapporteur that would like to weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I certainly can't answer all of those questions, but I just wanted to say we're not even asking for anything that isn't already established in international human rights law. Minority rights recognizes that minorities, and that includes religious or belief minorities, okay? Minorities must be involved in all matters that concern them. Peace concerns everybody. Minorities have borne an additional brunt of this conflict. So including minorities in the peace treaty is not a special ask, and it's not asking to give minorities power. It's asking to give minorities voice, and being part of building precisely, regaining the coexistence and cohesiveness that existed for thousands of years in Yemen, but has now been under assault for several decades, and trying to restore that. So it's not a special ask, but we need to do our homework, and that is to go beyond. I welcome this event because it goes beyond the normal freedom of religion or belief community to include the development community and those involved in the SDGs. Commissioner Davey, maybe there can be sorry to speak out of turn, but perhaps there can be a special session on Yemen. Perhaps it can be in coordination with an entity such as USIP or those that are more involved in peace and security. And perhaps we can try to move this forward, at least at this level, to reach out from the FORB community into the peace and security community and just say in a united voice that this is a right that already religious minorities and belief minorities have. So let's operationalize this in a practical way, in a timely fashion, in relation to Yemen.
Great.
Special Rapporteur, consider your request heard, and I'll take it back to my colleagues, and I hope that we can respond affirmatively.
You know, when we had a special hearing at USERP on Syria, the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the time, as you know, Syria is one of those places where peace and security, the conversation about that excluded the freedom of religion belief at the table. And oftentimes there's this idea that because it's so important, we'll get to that later, but we need to speak about peace and security. And the Deputy Assistant Secretary said at our hearing, there will never be a lasting peace for Syria without freedom of religion and belief at the table. And I feel the same as here in Yemen, that, you know, the peace and security has to include the religious minority components at the table, and the idea of having a society that embraces freedom and religious belief, as it did, as you said, for thousands of years before, that is crucial for a lasting peace for Yemen. So thank you for bringing that up, and both of you for your important remarks. I'm honored to now hand the floor to Anne Bawalda, the Executive Director of the Jubilee Campaign. I know one of the questions for you would be the Universal Periodic Review of Yemen is coming up in April and May 2024. What recommendations should states make? And then we'll hand it off to you for closing remarks.
Thank you. It's been an excellent and outstanding presentation today from all the speakers, and we are most pleased with the fact that we can have this dialogue, and thank you all for participating. With regards to the Universal Periodic Review of Yemen, there are a number of recommendations that can and should be made. Both NGOs can participate by submitting their recommendations, and then also the states can be submitting recommendations for Yemen. This includes removal of laws which criminalize changing one's religion, and especially removing the death penalty for apostasy. International law and agreements confirm over and again that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. And Yemeni laws and practice must ensure that fundamental right. It is noted that Yemen has supported prior recommendations under the prior UPR, Universal Periodic Review, with the exception of one recommendation. Surprisingly, in 2009, when Nigeria made the recommendation, the Yemen authorities declined to choose to make any acceptance of the recommendation of religion and belief. This must change. We must continue to put pressure on states, and states must continue to raise the fact that Yemen is not in compliance with its international obligations. Yemeni authorities must draw back into compliance with their international obligations. It should also be noted, as has been described by speakers today, that all countries must speak out against the ongoing detention of 11 Baha'i who are currently incarcerated, and must also end the re-education that takes place when individuals of faith are reprogrammed away from the faith that they've chosen. This must end, and this must be something that states encourage and require Yemen to end these practices. We also are looking at the gender segregation, as a couple of the speakers referred to today. That gender segregation must be raised in the UPR recommendations, and Yemen must be encouraged to end that segregation. Women must participate fully in society in all aspects of education and the marketplace, etc. Women should not be isolated. They must be encouraged to participate. And this is a very important in the peace process. So again, recommendations must call that the peace process include religious minorities, belief minorities, and women representatives that are speaking on behalf of their communities. So I do appreciate Dr. Nazila Ghania's remarks regarding intolerance as a concept which are in the founding documents related to FORB and the United Nations. That must be encouraged within the UPR. Now, again, we thank all of the speakers and participants today in this parallel event of the UN General Assembly 98th session. We encourage that all of us go back to our organizations and encourage within countries that all of these issues are raised and recommendations made for change. Change must happen in Yemen. Hate speech and incitement must end. State laws and Islamist violence must end. These are things which we all can agree to and we can all participate with and encourage one another to accomplish. So again, I thank you all. And I'd like to close our meeting today with the words of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the UN to Yemen, Hans Gunberg, who eloquently said, quote, "We cannot afford to seek a seasonal peace. The parties need to make further bold steps toward a peace that is sustainable and just and guarantees equal citizenship for all Yemenis, regardless of gender, faith, background, or race," unquote. We stand in unity on this principle, and I'm so grateful for all that have participated today. Thank you all for making your journeys to New York or participating online. We appreciate each and every one of you who have engaged today. Thank you, and we look forward to further participation together.
Thanks so much.